My name is Alleyne, and I am the Assistant Director of the Fierce Flower Poetry Center. And with me is Dr. Joanne Gabbin, who is the Executive Director and Founder of the Fierce Flower Poetry Center. Dr. Gabbin, why don't you tell us a little bit about Gwendolyn Brooks, who's named for the center is named for, and how you first encountered her work?
Well, it was when I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago. I had a wonderful mentor by the name of George Kent, and I was in his class, and he introduced me really to the poetry of Gwendolyn Brooks and Langston Hughes, Sterling Brown. It was interesting that I had not really encountered these poets in any degree as an undergraduate. And so it was so great to know that Gwendolyn Brooks was living actually in the city of Chicago, and they were good friends. And as I searched around for a topic for my graduate work, he suggested Gwendolyn Brooks. So I started studying her work at that particular time. In fact, he wanted me to do my dissertation on Gwendolyn Brooks. And by that time, I'd met her, I'd become friendly with her. I was sort of afraid of taking on the challenge of doing a dissertation on someone that I knew. So I decided to do my dissertation on Sterling Brown and went to Washington, D.C. to interview him, and then got to do my work with him. But, you know, I think George Kent was a little disappointed that I didn't do my dissertation on Gwen.
But you said you became friendly and you became friends, and one of the things you've done is you've brought her to all of your schools, including James Madison. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, once I graduated from the University of Chicago as a master's student, I was fortunate enough to get a job at Roosevelt University. And interestingly enough, I taught a course called Revolutionary Black Consciousness Literature. And of course, Gwendolyn Brooks was one of the poets that I taught, but I also taught the young poets that she mentored. Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, Hakeem Adabuti, who was like her literary son, Amir Baraka, of course. And I was teaching this course, and maybe after about 3 or 4 months at Roosevelt, one of my colleagues came to me and said, oh, I hear you teaching this course in Black literature. And he said, just offhandedly, well, you know, we almost got Gwendolyn Brooks to come to Roosevelt University. And I said, oh, what an honor that would have been to have her here. He said, well, you know, the faculty decided not to bring her. And I said, why? Because she was not credentialed. I was so unnerved by that statement and angry. And I thought, what in the world could convince them not to bring someone who 20 years before that had gotten a Pulitzer Prize in literature for her poetry, and she was not worthy to come, and I, this green student with a master's degree in English, was teaching here, so it just didn't fathom. So I decided at that moment that I would bring her every place I taught to sort of say to my students, this is a woman who deserves your attention. And so I did that. I did that at Chicago State. I did that again at Lincoln University. And when I came here to JMU, I invited her my very second semester here. So in 1986, she came.
To James Madison.
Yes.
And I know that the Fierce Flower Poetry Center is named from one of Brooks's poems, Second Sermon on the War Plan. How did you land on that name? And tell me more about why you decided to dedicate the center to Brooks.
Well, it was in 1993, the second time she came to the area. She didn't come to JMU. She went to Piedmont Community College, which is right in Charlottesville. And so she was coming so close to the university. I said, I must take my students there. So we ordered a bus, and about 40 of my students went to see her at Piedmont Community College. She did a great reading. And in typical Gwendolyn Brooks fashion, after the reading, she signed books for maybe an hour and a half.
Wow.
And, you know, I can just see Gwen looking up from the page of the book that she's signing, asking the name of the student, and then, you know, writing it out and saying, is that right? She did that and talked to each student. And so the next day, I called her at the hotel, and I said, Gwen, you really were so marvelous to my students. They have not stopped talking about how wonderful you were, all during the bus trip home, this morning in class, you know. And I said, you really should come to JMU this year so they can have more of you. And she said, well, no, I won't come back that soon, but next year. So that was 93 in April. So I had another year and maybe a half to plan a conference. Well, really to plan a reading. It started out as a reading for Gwendolyn Brooks. And once I let people know that she was coming, I let Nikki know that she was coming, and Sonia Sanchez and others. And they said, well, we want to come and read with her. So after a while, it was no longer a Gwendolyn Brooks reading. It was indeed a conference with her as a centerpiece. So with that in mind, I said, well, they already had a Gwendolyn Brooks conference at Chicago State. Right. So I said, well, you know, because I'm going to have more than Gwendolyn Brooks there, and it's going to be a large group of people representing a period from, say, 1950 on, I thought we need another title for this conference. And so I just started going through her poems to see if anything, you know, seemed right. And I hit upon Second Sermon on the Warpland. And, you know, this is a sermon. She is preaching to young people and radical, militant people in the late 1960s. And this poem, Second Sermon on the Warpland, was published in the Mecca in 1968. And it starts, this is the urgency, live, you know, conduct your blooming in the noise of the whirlwind. And I read down and I saw this line, the time cracks into furious flower, lifts its face all unashamed, and sways in wicked grace. And I said, that's it, furious flower. Because really, Gwendolyn Brooks is the furious flower. She is the one who, with her emphasis on craft, her emphasis on the beauty of the language, can represent the flower. But she's also, in this particular period, that expresses a lot of rage, expresses the desire for self-determination, expresses the desire for what? Power, Black power in the artistic movement. So Furious Flower seemed to not only represent her, but also the period that she was a part of, and in fact influenced. Because if I started thinking about all those poets who were writing from the 1950s on, Margaret Walker, Sam Allen, Maury Evans, and so on, the conference started to take shape. It started to take shape in terms of elders who were those who were influencing the poets of the Black Arts Movement. And then the Black Arts Movement poets influencing those like Rita Dove and Elizabeth Alexander, who came after them. And then there were poets who were the young ones, who were being influenced by Rita Dove and Michael Harper. So I sat there, and almost in 2 days, I had mapped out what this conference should look like. and I started inviting people. So before it was all over, we had more than 35 poets officially invited to Furious Flower, and Gwendolyn Brooks was going to be the center figure and the most important figure in this conference. And as it turned out, as the planning went on, she wanted to know if two people had been invited. The first one was Dolores Kendrick, who's the author of The Women of Plums, because she said, I'd like Dolores to introduce me. And I thought, okay, that I can make that happen. And then she said, well, is Rita Dove coming? And I said, Rita Dove is now Poet Laureate of the United States, and she has a really full schedule, and I don't know whether she'll be able to come. And she said, well, I would like her to be there. So when Gwen asked you to get someone there, I went back to Rita Dove and I said, look, Rita, she really wants you to be here. So she did. She came, and she was a part of that amazing Friday where we unveiled the stars. So that's how it happened. That's a very long answer to a very good question, but that history should be known. It's one of those things that I marvel at, how that came to be and how she was so gracious to come on a train
from Chicago,
18, maybe 22 hours to Harrisonburg to be with us for that particular event.
You have a special story you'd like to tell about the last time you spoke to Gwendolyn Brooks.
The last time I talked at length with Gwendolyn Brooks, and I remember it was a call that she made to me on January the 1st, 2000. The very first day of the new century, she called me, and she said, I just wanted to call you to tell you how significant you've been in my life. And I said, Gwen, I should be calling you, telling you that. But she said, Joanne, you've taken so much time to recognize me, to support poetry, not only my poetry, but the poetry of younger poets, that I just thought I wanted to call you and tell you that. I did talk with her one other time, but it was maybe 2 weeks before her death. And but I remember so fondly her calling me on that day and giving me that compliment. Because, Gwendolyn Brooks was known for her kindness, but she was also known for her razor sharpness. And if you didn't do things quite right, she would let you know. And so I'd had calls from her like that as well. But so this call was extremely special.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.